You hear AI all over back home. You hear it from the big people, the Texas Medical Center, largest medical center in the country, the future of AI in medicine. It's all pervasive throughout our economy.
I find the best ideas, typically, and I know I'll get in trouble for this, don't come from Washington, D.C. They come from the nurses and the doctors out there in Seattle, Washington. People that are on their feet in the front lines and on the deck plate taking care of patients day by day. I want to hear what their ideas are and then provide them the platform to research those ideas with artificial intelligence.
I get this so many different times where people have 3 or 4 screens open and they're trying to make sense out of some amount of data, throw it into an Excel spreadsheet. And then I ask them, what are you? Well, I'm an economist, not a spreadsheet expert, right? But we've turned these people because IT is so hard and not instead of enabling them, it's actually hurting them. So I'm very excited that AI, RPA, some of these newer technologies can actually help us.
I think the most important thing to consider with data is I am using this data and ingesting it or putting it out downstream. Who is using that data, and am I making it easy for them to use that data is really the biggest driver that I can think of. We all build technology and there's always a shiny thing coming up. There's AI, there's machine learning, now there's robotic process automation.
Americans are going to be able to get their health records from their providers on an app on their smartphone for free. One thing about it is that, as opposed to some other initiatives, we are not going to be solving this problem technologically in-house. We are going to be setting standards, but we're relying on the private sector to develop those apps and to develop the ways of coordinating to get the data that are going to bring them to the department.
Good morning. My name is Michael Hoffman, and I'm the president of Government CIO Media and Research. Government CIO Media and Research is the online destination for thought leadership and research focused on the transformation of government IT. Our experienced team collects the best practices and research regarding the advancing technology and management landscape. I want to welcome everyone who has tuned in this morning to our virtual event, Artificial Intelligence, New Horizons in Medicine. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, and we're looking forward to hearing how government agencies are harnessing the power and potential of artificial intelligence and machine learning. It's obviously a unique and historic moment in our country's history, so we wanted to also address how these technologies are impacting healthcare and COVID-19. We invited some of the top government and industry executives to discuss AI and machine learning in healthcare. The topics we will tackle today include advanced data analytics, accelerating medical research, data sharing, and defense health analytics. And we'll close with a Chief Data Officer Spotlight. Before we kick off with our program, I'd like to thank today's sponsors, Axiom, NVIDIA, NetApp, Red Hat, and DataRobot for underwriting this event and making these important conversations possible today. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring our audience valuable content like this morning's virtual event. I want to remind audience members that you can submit questions for our speakers in the comment box you see below the video player on our screen, and we will choose some to ask during the conversation this morning. I also want to encourage everyone to participate in the conversation on social media. So without further ado, we'll start with a panel discussion focused on advanced data analytics. It will be moderated by Jason Chong, Government CIO's Director of Data Strategy and Analytics, and I'll allow him to introduce our esteemed panelists. So with that, I'd like to welcome our first panel to the virtual stage. I'll hand it off to you, Jason.
Thank you very much, Michael. Hello and welcome to the first session of Government CIO's virtual event on AI, New Horizons in Medicine. My name is Jason Chong. I am the Director of Data Strategy and Analytics, Government CIO, and will be the moderator. In this session, we have invited 3 fantastic speakers to discuss about advanced data analytics and AI in the federal and commercial space. Our first speaker is Neil Chaudhry. Neil, if you could please greet the audience so that they can see you.
Hi.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Neil leads AI initiatives at GSA's Center of Excellence. He has 20 years of experience in technology delivery, operations, and program management in defense, intelligence, and national security sectors. At the AI Center of Excellence, Neil advises federal agencies on establishing mature data governance and management practices, developing innovative approaches for leveraging data as a strategic asset, and laying the foundation for advancing data discovery, access, and use through AI and machine learning. Our second speaker is Craig Wingate. Craig, if you could please greet the audience so that they can see you.
Hi.
Fantastic. He's the Senior Director of Analytics at Axiom. He has been developing offline and online marketing solutions for more than 20 years, utilizing a variety of statistical and machine learning techniques across multiple industries, including healthcare, financial services, travel and entertainment, retail, and consumer packaged goods, all with a very strong focus on maintaining privacy constraints. Before joining Axiom, Craig was an adjunct professor in statistics at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York, and was the co-founder of Quinetics, which was acquired by Axiom in 2008. Okay. Our third speaker is Dr. Gil Altrovitz. He is the director of the National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the VA. He is a member of the Precision Medicine Task Force under the White House's Office of the National Coordinator and is also one of the core writers of the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy's National AI R&D Strategic Plan. He is a professor at Harvard Medical School and the Computational Health Informatics program at Boston Children's Hospital. His work on integrative methods for big data in the biomedical informatics space has been cited by more than 50 peer-reviewed publications and books. We are having some technical difficulties. He will be joining us shortly. So to start this off, everyone, for the longest time, data analytics and AI have been touted as the next frontier for innovation that will revolutionize the 21st century. Data consumption for the average consumer has really increased due to extended usage of platforms such as cell phones, availability of streaming content or whatnot. Naturally, this led to the next phase, which is to understand and utilize that data. And it isn't surprising that there's this rapid adoption of AI and analytics today. However, to me, it is still surprising the pace at which AI and analytics is being adopted in government. It really is unprecedented. So why is it so different for AI and analytics? And what do you think is the driving force for this adoption? We'd love to start with you, Neil, and your thoughts.
So, I've been in this space for a good 20 years, as you mentioned, right? I've been in from the days when we used to have our dot matrix printers printing the 2-foot wide reports, and churning them out. And then you look over there and you're doing some more work to where we are now, where if I don't see a choropleth or a heat map, I get frustrated, right? Because I'm not getting the information I need that I'm so accustomed to getting, absorbing. So that's where, when we see the art of the possible in the commercial sector and those ready-made tools where you don't have to be a programmer, you just have to be a good business lead to understand how to use the tools to get the answer you need. It makes life very simple. So, that's where adoption has been increasing because we see these tools that are easy to use by anybody. Thank you. And I think Gil is back on.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you very much, Neil. Craig, would you like to continue and share your thoughts?
Sure. I agree with that 100%. And also, I think that obviously the amount of data that's captured in today's digital world is stuff that you never used to have. And so tons more data, storage capability, again, increasing hugely, processing power, same thing. And then you've got techniques, and open source really unlocked that world. And so all these things converge, and just as Neil said, you've got, just an acceleration of people using, and now it's bridging to citizen data scientist, I think is one of the terms. And so lots more folks involved for sure. So just a very exciting time to be in this world.
Fantastic. So Gil, why do you feel that it's different for AI and analytics, and why do you believe that government is adopting this at such an unprecedented rate? What do you believe is the driving force for this adoption?
Right. So I think when you think about AI, there's a few features that really make it unique. One of the things when we looked in the past about doing analyses was that at first you could put down all the numbers, all the information on a piece of paper, right? And then when you had a spreadsheet, you could see all the numbers and all the information right in front of you, right? But what we see in AI is that there's just so much information, so many different types of information from so many different locations that you actually can't see it and kind of feel it right in front of you. I think that's what makes AI in some ways also, hard to understand and explain, because it's not tangible, because there's so much information at such a fast rate that you can't actually have it right in front of you. And why it's really important right now, and I think why a number of agencies are really looking at it, is because that's the world that we're living in today. The world we're living in today is information that is coming at us so quickly at such large volumes that we can't actually sit down and take either a paper or pencil or look at it in a spreadsheet. We essentially need the assistance of computers and so forth to give us that information. It doesn't mean that they're deciding, making decisions, but they can help and aid and give us supplementary information so we can make the best decisions that we can.
Fantastic. And that leads on to my next question, Gillen. I think, when there's this challenge of trying to synthesize insights from the data from this large pool that is very difficult to understand, to socialize, and to really drive towards the right priorities, then how are you setting the priorities for AI and analytics initiatives in your organization? I'm sure there's a lot of competing priorities out there. Everyone thinks that their priority is the most important. I would love to hear your thoughts on what your priorities are for your organization.
Certainly. When we think about the priorities, we think about what is our mission and who we are here to serve. And for us at the VA, it's the veterans. So what we want to do is, and what we have been doing, is getting and engaging veterans through setting up a veteran engagement board, through other activities, working across different offices that have already been engaging veterans to understand what are their priorities, what are their concerns around AI, what are their needs, and what emphases, types of emphasis they would like to do. At the same time, we're also looking at what are cross-cutting areas that can benefit a number of different priorities, whatever they end up being. And we've identified a number of those. Some of the ones that at the Institute we're looking at are deep learning, explainable AI, trustworthy AI, multi-scale AI, and privacy-preserving AI. These are priority areas that, regardless of what, or these are kind of general supporting foundational layers that will help support the priority areas that we're seeking and working with the veterans to obtain.
Oh, fantastic. That's great. Craig, what are your thoughts on the private sector? I'm sure that the priorities are very different at Axiom, and we'd love to hear and let the audience know the range of differences that you could see in priorities across different sectors and between commercial and also federal.
Sure. Definitely the demand and need accelerating. And I think Gil mentioned explainable AI. That's probably our number one focus. We've used AI in differing degrees for a number of years, and both in predictive models and such, and advanced measurement techniques where you have to unwind bias, such, and also some text analytics as well mixed in there, and segmentations. But from what it used to be, where even a logistic regression model, you'd have a few driving variables, and you could show the folks that our clients how to best use that, and or how that's working. And they'd understand it. They could see the drivers. But as Gil mentioned, now you forget about it. There's 10 to 20 times more variables that are in models, and there needs to be techniques, visualization techniques, and that's what we're accelerating really, is explaining and showing what the drivers are. Because if we can't convince the clients, internal or external, that this is something that's going to work, it's not just a magic black box, then they're all, then they'll take it on and use it. If we don't convince them, they won't use it. So continuous learning is another focus, and real-time applications. We're taking that up in terms of our work at Axiom.
Fantastic. Neil, at the GSA, are your priorities different? I'm sure it's quite different from both Craig and Gil's priorities.
So, I'm in a very interesting organization. It's the technology transformation services. So not just for GSA, but whole of government. And within there, I'm in the Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence, one of the leads over there. And what we do is we go out and we actually help our federal partners, at the CIO level, build strategies and implement strategies to move to the next generation, right? So it's working with our industry partners, working with, our government partners, and also working with our FFRDCs and our universities to create these holistic packages, and really trying to move from the past, which was relational databases, right, to non-relational databases, moving from RDBMS to, graph databases, where the things you can do are just so interesting, right? Being able to add geospatial and temporal data to your existing structured data to find insights that you never knew existed. Being able to actually not even worry about the data, just apply artificial intelligence of the metadata to get better solutions, right? That's the future, and that's what we're really helping our federal agencies transform to. Thank you.
Oh, so on another note, just to continue on that conversation, Neil, if you're at the forefront of it and trying to drive strategy and a change management, so to speak, and also a mindset shift of those people that you're trying to help, those agencies that you're trying to help, then I could imagine you're faced with a lot of challenges and barriers. Could you please describe some of these challenges and barriers and then how you're addressing them?
If you've been in this business for a while, what you realize, it's always a people, process, and technology issue. The technology, in my mind, is the easiest problem to solve, right? So you have to start with the people. And when I talk about AI, I describe AI to people as augmented intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Right? Because the purpose of AI is to augment your workforce, not replace your workforce. So that's the first hurdle that we go over. We say, imagine, if you had 5 virtual assistants, the amount of work you could be able to do, high level work, as opposed to minutia. Imagine if you had 4 to 5 digital assistants. Imagine what your work would be like. And that's the people problem, right? But then that's also education. That's getting people comfortable with new technology, getting comfortable with delegation to a machine, right? And then once you work the people issue out, because this is AI in government is not about replacing people. It's about augmenting people to improve delivery of services. Then you start talking processes and you say, what processes need to change? And, we start talking about bias and ethics and all those. You don't want to amplify small problems by, applying machines at scale. What you want to do is make sure that your models as designed are not, are actually fixing problems, not creating new problems. And then you work on the technology stack, which is a path to production where you say, if your technology had a lifespan of 10 years, how do we slowly sunset your technology while putting new technology in place? Because you can't rip everything out day one and put a whole new system. So those are the kind of general things, but it always goes back to people, process, and technology, with the core message being AI and data analytics is about augmenting your workforce, not replacing your workforce. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic insights, Neil. Thank you very much. Gil, could you please care to share your thoughts on the challenges that you are facing and barriers to achieving your goals in the VA and in your organization?
Right. So I think there are a number of challenges in AI that really apply across organizations. So and we're seeing a number of those as well. And so when you have a new area like artificial intelligence, there's a lack of there's sort of a lack of knowledge space across the organization and across organizations, really, in terms of how to develop and develop that workforce, right? And so you have to start thinking about creative and new ways to do that. How do you develop talent, for example, by promoting within or working with outside experts, building teams across different agencies. There's a number of these aspects that we're looking at, and in working across and interacting with other agencies, we're seeing that some of the same, by working together, we can really make a big difference and attack some of these challenges together.
No, it's fantastic. Greg, what can you share your thoughts on the commercial sector and the challenges that you're facing, and also how you're addressing those challenges?
Sure. Yeah, one of our probably bigger challenges from this angle is context of the data, and when you're putting together so many pieces and from so many different levels that they were organized. So it's, if it's financial, it's, you've got account, you've got the owner of the account, and that can go both ways. Two accounts can be owned by one person. Two individuals can own one account, and then you go up to the household, then you go up to the branch, and you've just got multiple levels of data. So now we're applying some more automated techniques to process and ingest and aggregate that. It really requires some thought on how you're going to do that. And the other piece that's changed really for us is it used to be much more that we would deliver a solution in whole. So we would deliver, it could be scores for models, it could be reports, analytics, insights, there's a deck and so on, but it was all fixed what we would deliver. Now we're delivering more data sets, aggregated and organized data to clients so that their business analysts can use that and spend way more time than we would, and they're experts in their own world, and so they can explore. And so now, and I learned to live with that other people would be doing the analytics, but it's got to be very structured and controlled how what you convey, that you convey enough enough of the pieces for them to understand that context and get the most out of whatever they're looking at. So context is yep, that's the one we're overcoming.
Oh wow, that's great insights, Craig. Given that, if you think of it, to extend that question, COVID-19 has really changed the lives of every business out there, people, and the priorities have all been impacted. And I would think that would be no different for AI and analytics related initiatives. Has the focus areas changed in your organization since the COVID-19 outbreak? As you know, in the commercial sector, in general, when I speak across businesses, they're trying to mitigate workforce interruptions and such. Lots of things have changed. What has changed within your organization? How are you approaching things differently post-COVID?
Yeah, definitely a focus on our team and each other, and supporting each other through this is the culture is a part of it for sure, and you've got kids going back to school. A lot of my colleagues have kids in that spot, and it's so uncertain for them. Our kids are grown a little older, but it's just that's an important part of the culture, and we're learning a little bit about each other, even though we're more distant. The other pieces in terms of the businesses, they're very much they're a lot of experience that has been learned over the years has been disrupted, and so now forget analytics and modeling, but just people's experience with how to deal with their customers and manage customer relations. Consumer behavior has been impacted in a unique and unprecedented way. And so some industries are, we work with a few airlines, and they're in a tough spot, and some other industries are doing fine, doing great. And so because of the nature of this, it's, again, we were just chatting a little before, but it's sort of like a hurricane where you have an event that there's people act a little bit before as it's approaching and they hear news about that. During, their behavior changes as well, and then after. And so the challenge right now is that you have a ton of these, hurricanes all over that are at different degrees of strength, and different people are reacting to the same event in different ways. And so you have really, a geotemporal is sort of the name for it, but it's just you've got a time component and you've got a geo component. And so organizing and restructuring data to look at that and attempt to account for that in the past as we move and look at data, because analytics, everything is about using today and yesterday to predict tomorrow. And so we have to have that set of experiences people are going through, we have to have that organized. And so it impacts measurement, targeting, all the stuff that our clients are focused on with us. So we think we've got a pretty good framework for it. So, but it's tough. Who knows? I mean, next month, a couple months from now, an election. It's very much unprecedented terms. So quicker turnaround on analytics is also something that very important right now. And being flexible and quick to react for our clients, very important.
Yeah. Of course. Thank you very much for sharing your insights on the commercial sector. Neil, could you please share how COVID has impacted your initiatives, your focus areas in your organization in relation to analytics and AI?
So, yes, one of the things that I'd like to say is I'm very fortunate to work for an organization, not just my organization, but the federal workforce at large and the leadership, that they have put safety of people first, right? All of us took immediate steps, our leadership, to ensure that the federal workforce was safe. But that also means our traditional ways of how we used to do work have changed dramatically. And it's shown us the resiliency of the federal workforce. So for instance, in our case, you can see examples of DoD moving to a CVR platform immediately, allowing 800,000 people within less than 30 days to all communicate using collaboration suites, secure collaboration suites. Same thing with us, at the AI Centers of Excellence and TTS, we're already using, commercial tools like, collaboration tools. So we were able to immediately jump to, virtual collaboration. But we have noticed a really increased uptake in federal agency cooperation, where data sharing agreements, everybody recognizes the urgency that COVID-19 is a whole of government problem. It's not just one agency problem, and everybody is really collaborating. Things that used to take a lot longer to do, data sharing agreements and stuff, are getting done a lot faster now, right? And meetings are, because they're shorter as opposed to an hour-long meeting, a shorter meeting, and because you are not limited by the number of people you can fit in that conference room, meetings are getting more productive, right? Where information is getting shared more readily. So we're seeing a lot of change in government where collaboration is increasing, access to data is increasing, where everybody's realizing that many problems are whole of government problems, not an agency-specific problem. And the types of tools we use, whether it's containers or other such tools to share our models and share our information, that's the future, and everybody's recognizing that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for sharing your insights, Neil. Jill, we'd love to hear how COVID has impacted you and your organization in your focused areas.
Yes. So I think first echo a number of things that Neil said. I think that this is really a transformational kind of moment in a way, and it has really changed the way that a number of different people kind of work together. It's bringing together a number of the different offices around a common common cause. And I think that some of the things that we've seen with COVID are going to translate into the future. So I'll give you an example. It's actually work that we're doing with the Washington, D.C. VA. on these predictive models for COVID, for admissions, mortality, and so forth. We've worked with them to develop and integrate this model. And as part of that work, it involved work across different offices, and things got done very quickly, right? Because there's a sense of urgency, as Anil and some other speakers have mentioned. And so we now know, in a sense, what is possible. We know that it is possible to do these things in this quick way, and that is leading to new processes and new ways of thinking that I'm hopeful we can translate into the future to other areas as well, beyond COVID, as we move forward in AI and applying that to other areas that really are going to help the veterans in a number of different urgent priority areas as well.
All right. To expand on that question as my final question, has the future, given the uncertainty of the times, what do you believe is that future state of AI? How do you feel that this AI landscape will change in light of all COVID and the uncertainty in the environment?
So I think when we think about what are some of the changes, some of the changes have been happening already, and I think it's accelerating it, right? So individuals being able to work remotely across the country. We've already been doing that, and there were a number of different people from the Institute and others who are different offices working across the country. But now there's been acceleration in terms of the power of the tools to allow those collaborations to happen even more efficiently. So I think we'll be seeing that. We'll be seeing an AI collaborations between caregivers, physicians, patients, and the AI systems. So it won't just be thinking about it as like there's an AI system, there's the patient, there's the caregiver. It'll be an integrated process and workflow. And I think some of the things actually around COVID, which will make us more attentive and more ready to accept and work with technologies like AI, because we're going to be more used to working with technologies where there are virtual agents, there are avatars and so forth, that underneath it, the AI can really help play a role. And then, of course, the key is that I think a lot of these technologies are really going to be enabling providers rather than actually deciding for them. So that's going to be a key for acceptance as well, to be able to speak the language of the providers, of the different users, and to help them in making different decisions rather than necessarily deciding for them. I think that'll really help moving forward, and that's what we're starting to see with some of the COVID things as well, right? Like we have limited information sometimes about COVID, and so people are more willing to accept and learn about new information. And I think some of that will carry over into the future, and being able and more willing to accept different pieces of information from sources that maybe traditionally we haven't used in making decisions.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for your insights. Neil, I think that what Gil just mentioned is very similar to the point that you made earlier on augmented AI. Do you feel, what is the future state of AI for you? How do you feel that AI landscape will change for you and your organization?
Yeah, so AI, especially, putting AI out there and having open source tools where, it's transferred this knowledge where everybody now can become a citizen data scientist, right? They can take the data and they can do wonderful things with it. And this idea about democratic access to data, that's what's going forward. I see a lot of analysts in government now saying, why don't I have access to the data? Or they'll reach out, get that data, and they'll do wonderful things with it with pseudo-analytic tools as a precursor to using AI. And, even in my community, we have a ton of people going to data.gov and looking at those data sets, especially with, this recent pandemic. People are actually going out there looking at data sets, and then you experiment. You can actually go online, you can do wonderful things. Every big platform has learning applications where you can learn. They're dumping data on there. They're getting familiar with all these AI tools. So it's very exciting to see the next generation, taking over and not being afraid of data and not being afraid of big data. Just going out there. Even my kids, they can go out there and, my oldest daughter in high school is running Hadoop clusters on our desktop at home. And I was like, oh my God, so it's that sort of thing. You see that innovation across government where the analysts, the younger workforce coming up is not afraid. They're like, just give me access to the data and I will show you wonderful things that you never thought possible. And that's very exciting to see. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Craig, when you think about the commercial sector, government is really relying on the commercial side to really lead the way for a lot of the innovative technologies. Has the future state of AI changed for you in your views pre-COVID and now? And how do you believe that the AI landscape will change in the future?
Yeah, I agree with everything the other speakers are saying, and it's just accelerated. I mean, the COVID, I think, has accelerated use and need and demand. And just as Anil was saying, so many people now are seeing visualizations and charts and thinking about things from a more analytical perspective, and that helps us all. And so I just see greater demand for sure. The only thing that right now you see the dropping of some guards around privacy, where Google sharing data, Apple sharing some data, location data, for example. That's been something that's challenging for us in and out in digital world. And Axiom is privacy is one of our, if not our top priority. It's tied with something else, but it's just a huge consideration at Axiom that at times can be a little, come on, can't we use that? But we have a very thorough team that reviews data and reviews the pieces. And so I think this is opening up that trend a bit too. And so that people are just, as was said, people are feeling more comfortable. And so data that we are hesitant to use, and we really, some companies I think bend the rules a little bit, but Axiom's, and I'm not just saying this, we really is very strict about how we approach digital and environments, what we can and can't use. And it's, as that drops though, that just opens up more and more pieces, because I think some of it can go away. And so hopefully we'll lead the government and help in that direction, but it's slow, because everybody, you don't want to make a mistake and give away identities and personal information and health information especially. And so anyway, I do see that the overwhelming trend is up, and privacy though, that's the tricky part of it, balancing that piece.
And that's where I'd like to piggyback off what Craig said, right? Sometimes I get asked the question, why isn't the government innovating faster, right? And typically what I explain is that there's a difference, between if somebody gets people you may know feature wrong, right, and you get an X in your feed of people you may know, versus a government benefits or adjudication decision that we get wrong. So we have to be very careful. So where the government is innovative, you just don't see that innovation because it's behind a proof of concept or pilot that an agency is working. Mm-hmm. But we're being very deliberate, because this is about public service. And we have to be very careful about, issues of bias, issues of, security, issues of privacy. And, for AI, we're taking a very deliberate approach, but we're also being very innovative behind the scenes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Craig, Gil, Neil. I think it was a wonderful conversation that we had. I want to thank you and say that it was an honor to kick off this event with such esteemed guests. The GCIO, the audience, and I really appreciate your sharing your time, insights, and thought leadership on AI and analytics. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like we have time for additional audience questions, so we'll have to move on to the next session. This concludes the first session on advanced data analytics. We would like to transition now to the next session, which is accelerating medical research with AI, and it will be moderated by our Senior Vice President, Aaron Mirsky. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Jason. What a great job kicking off our event today. Thank you so much to the first panel. Our second panel is focused on approaches to accelerating medical research using artificial intelligence. Our presenters today are tackling some of the highest priority challenges we are facing in our world. As health researchers, technologists, doctors, and leaders within their organizations, they are truly at the forefront of advancing discoveries with diseases like COVID-19. Let me first sincerely thank each of you for the important work that you're doing for our country and for your dedication and commitment. The number of COVID-related projects within your space is astounding, and I know you guys are completely dedicated. I am impressed in getting to know you and the work that you're doing, so thank you. I'm Erin Mirsky. I'm a leader, government CIO, focused on digital health. And I am pleased to introduce our panel today. We have Dr. Patty Brennan, Dr. Mona Flores, Dr. Behrooz Shabastari, and Alistair Thompson. To start things off, if each of you would briefly introduce yourself and share more about the role of artificial intelligence in the health space as it relates to the work at your institute and organization. And let's start things off with Alistair.
Hi, thanks, Erin. I'm Alistair Thompson. I have the privilege of serving as the Chief Information Officer at the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute at the NIH. I also serve as the co-lead of the Biodata Catalyst program, which is our large cloud-based infrastructure for heart, lung, blood, and sleep research, which I'll be talking about a fair bit. AI has become a really important part of what we do, and it's really been enabled by the technologies of the cloud, GPUs, and other techniques, which have just made machine learning techniques, deep neural networks, and other elements of AI feasible in ways that we've never thought before. For instance, we have a program working with the University of North Carolina within Biodata Catalyst that's working on using deep learning to quantify pulmonary vascular remodeling in COPD. So in COPD, the vasculature in the lung changes and shifts. Interestingly, we're also seeing that in COVID-19. But that's an area where entirely new research methods have been developed in order to actually understand what is happening deep within the lung from CT images. It's something we've never been able to do before. There's a whole variety of other things I could go into, but I think the key thing that's happening today is that these techniques are being applied across the board in every area we're looking at it, whether it's genomics or imaging or wherever else. And the reapplicability of models developed for one modality to another has been startling, and it's led to some tremendous progress.
That's great. Next, Dr. Brennan, who is really taking charge around the data and data discovery side of things.
Thanks, Erin. Good morning. I'm Patty Brennan, the Director of the National Library of Medicine. In this role, I direct both our intramural and extramural research programs, and we manage enormous genomic databases, which serve as the fodder for many of the AI research activities. NLM is particularly investing in new methods to be able to create generalizable, reusable AI strategies. We're also investing in ways to de-bias data sets to make sure that they are reflective of and relevant to the problems they're being applied to. Finally, the National Library of Medicine plays a big role across the NIH, and particularly under the COVID crisis, to make sure that the data repositories that we're standing up to make sure we capture relevant data remain available, trustable, and discoverable for the scientific community. Finally, I want to remind you that the research that we do emphasizes the importance of trust, accuracy, and transparency when we're dealing with human data and human understanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Shabastari, I know your life right now is COVID-19. If you could introduce yourself and share a little bit more.
Yeah, hi. My name is Gregory Chavez. I'm with the National Institute of Biomedical Imaging Bioengineering. I have different hats, and I'm a director of the National Technology Centers, that they are big centers for dissemination and technology development. Our vision is mostly engineering the future of the health, and that is to transfer through engineering the understanding of disease and prevention, detection, and diagnosis and treatment. When I mention those names, AI is written all over those. As we are biomedical imaging and bioengineering, so we start with that kind of a technology, and then we've been lately added bioinformatics technologies that it covers all the AI and related area in our application. So our director, Dr. Bruce Stronberg, puts the modeling and computation at the center of our technology. And of course, math and AI is going to be right at the middle and to inform the information and the technology we are developing. And our technology, as I said, it varies from engineering principle in the biology to bench to bedside and point of care technology as well as wearable and implantable devices. The major one would be imaging technology. When you're talking about the major imaging like MRI and CT, we are using the AI in both ends, in the front end of getting the images and the data and also analyzing them and making a decision. And then we also use our technology that includes AI in therapeutics and image-guided delivery. So for all of that, actually lately I don't see any application. It does not have a word AI in it. So basically, we do support technology, but mostly we are kind of a hub. Our technology gets used by other institutes like Heart and Lung and NHLBI, and as well as NCI, that they use it for different things. We are more broad. If it's a specific, we do not do that, but basically we do a technology development that includes AI, and I will talk about some of the application later.
Great. And Dr. Flores, it's great to have a Silicon Valley commercial perspective. If you would introduce yourself and share a little bit more about how NVIDIA is supporting medical research and AI.
Of course. Hi, everybody. I'm Mona Flores. I'm a cardiac surgeon and the global head of medical AI at NVIDIA. 3 years ago, I joined NVIDIA to help in bringing AI into medicine. NVIDIA is known, of course, as the world leader in AI computing technologies. And while NVIDIA's technology spans many industries, from autonomous driving to robotics to manufacturing, healthcare AI is top of mind, and especially in these times of the COVID pandemic. And one thing to note is at NVIDIA, we do not make any direct healthcare products. However, we are, as Bruce just said, he's enabling the other institutes at the NIH. NVIDIA is really the engine underneath AI. And we are enabling all of the developers, the development of and adoption of AI in healthcare with our AI specialized computing hardware, with our platforms, libraries, software development kits. So developers today can use NVIDIA's hardware and software to easily and efficiently develop AI applications, whether they are working on their laptop, on a server in the data center, or on any of the cloud providers worldwide. We really are the engine underneath all of the AI.
Thank you. I know each of you mentioned AI is leaking into every project, every application, every component of your work. Dr. Shabastari, if you could share a few use cases related to COVID-19 and how your institute and how NIH is applying it.
What AI does is basically mimics human intelligence, and that's what we're trying to do. With actually asking about the role of AI in COVID, I'm going to reverse that. COVID accelerated the AI. Basically, there's things happening. COVID has become a test bed for the AI, and right now it's pushing the envelope. They're getting approved. FDA is approving faster. There's a lot of AI applications coming out. One of the major ones, that couple of them I have it, is basically working with the chest X-ray or a CT, getting information from the chest X-ray, combine that. When you're taking a lung X-ray, it also includes cardiac and other information. You get information, and with the other data, you combine this thing to detect it, and you can do detection in early stage. Or if you include cardiac and the bone mass and other things, combining with the AI, you should be able to predict the level of the thing and decide that who are in trouble, what is the who needs additional help. So it plays a major role, and it happens in all of the point-of-care devices. There's unbelievable interest in application in the COVID. One would be an application that is basically, if it works, it would be great, is you breathe into a device, and then based on breathing, the same as what the cups use to detect in the alcohol level. So you breathe to the device, and it will tell you have a COVID or not. And there are similar other applications, and some of them are crazy to detecting from the cough or a speech, and there's other one. But I'm enjoying the challenge. And one thing that is important with the COVID, we just launched the consortium of that is a medical imaging and data resource center. This is in collaboration with the RSNA, with AAPM, and ACR, that is American College of Radiology, and AAPM, that is Association of the Physicists, American Association of Physicists in Medicine. And this has been led by University of Chicago. This is a major project. They're trying to get the data, COVID data, and clean this data, and develop an AI tool to work with this data and make it available to the community in form of data that is a clean data. That is a very major challenge to get the good data, and then to be able to even make the tool that it would be available to everyone. It was launched last week. It would be very successful in doing many things, and but COVID is only the testbed at this time. The center will exist for other application, but it's starting with the COVID.
That's very exciting news. I know from talking to Alistair, there is a really important initiative to not just look at what is happening today in COVID research, but starting to prepare for the future effects of COVID on our population. Alistair, could you share a little bit more about how NHLBI is focused on the future and the data and the technologies that you are working on now?
Yeah, when this all started back in December, January, we all thought this was a respiratory disease, like the flu or whatever else. And I think the one thing that has become crystal clear in the last few months is that this is not your average respiratory disease. It is having you're going to have long-term effects. It attacks the heart, the kidneys, the brain. All of these are going to be, affected for a long time to come. NHLBI's mission is really in these chronic diseases that come out of diseases like COVID or anything else. And so our focus is very much on setting things up for the long term, using our cohort studies like the Framingham Heart Study and the Jackson Heart Study, and looking at the participants in those studies and beginning to track them relative to COVID, linking in their electronic health record data, applying AI techniques to understand what the progression of the disease is likely to be, looking for predictors for instance, are people who have cardiovascular involvement from COVID today going to be suffering from heart failure in 10 years from now? And what are the indicators for someone to do that, whether they're genomic or whether from clinical observations? And so a lot of what we're doing is working together large amounts of data. AI loves data. And so our goal is to get as much data of as many modalities as we can so that we can start understanding what the long-term prognosis is for patients and how we should be treating them. It's made some fundamental changes in the way that NHLBI is thinking about things. It shifted our priorities. While we still focus on, the fact that heart disease kills more people in the United States than any other disease, and it's important, this is going to become a major area for us. And I think it's important to note that we're not doing this alone. I'm really glad I've got my other NIH colleagues here, because each one of them has a part in the response to COVID, and it's all interconnected. Sometimes I think people see us as these 27 individual fiefdoms, but the collaboration that's been going on within NIH, bringing the different talents, bringing the NIBRB imaging and connecting it to Biodata Catalyst, those are tremendously valuable things, not just for COVID, but for healthcare in general. And we're seeing the application of AI, as I said earlier, in new ways. So, for example, I mentioned the vasculature deep learning algorithm for COPD. We're now applying that to both CT imaging and chest X-rays from COVID. to look for instance, early detection of pneumonia in chest X-rays that a radiologist is not necessarily able to see, and doing that at point of care. The chest X-ray comes out of the portable machine, they take a photo of it on their phone, they submit it, and it gives them a read on some things in here that are going to be indicative that this person is going to end up in the ICU. And then tracking that through to how are we treating them in the ICU? How are we then going to treat them when they come out of the ICU afterwards?
It's amazing to see the forward-leaning and the collaboration that is happening on campus, which really connects back to the Library of Medicine. Dr. Brennan, if you could share more about the leadership role in data and how you look across all the different institutes in that role, that would be great.
With my colleagues Bruce Tromberg from NIBIB and Eric Green from the Genome Institute, we are helping the Common Fund launch a new initiative called ABLE, Artificial Intelligence for Biomedical Excellence. This is a $160 million 7-year program that's designed to do a number of things to accelerate biomedical uses of artificial intelligence, create data design centers, develop what we call gold data sets, that is AI-ready data sets, driven not by original hypotheses, but rather from a discovery perspective. And finally, to develop the ethical, legal, and social guidance to make sure that the knowledge we build is reflective of and meaningful to society as a whole.
Well, I'm sure everyone's excited to hear about these new projects that you guys are sharing information on. So we've heard about all these, the imaging and the massive amounts of data, which is a great segue into NVIDIA and high performance computing. I know you guys have been a leader in the White House Consortium for HPC. Could you share more about how that is shaping up?
Yeah, definitely. So NVIDIA was invited to, was chosen actually, to provide a task force for computer scientists to join this high performance computing consortium for COVID-19. The consortium is bringing together leaders from industry, from academia, from government to accelerate the research into COVID using the world's largest computers and compute resources. It essentially brings together a multidisciplinary team of domain scientists, computer scientists, high-performance computers to work on projects specific to COVID. So the objective is to accelerate the development of effective methods to detect, contain, treat the coronavirus. It also supports researchers by providing access to more than 30 supercomputers with more than 50,000 GPUs in them. So NVIDIA's task force is supporting the consortium by, we provide expertise in applying AI and accelerating scientific applications, whether in molecular biology, in genomics, in computational fluid dynamics, medical imaging. We're also tasked with optimizing the compute at scale. So if you think about it, optimizing performance is really creating new compute. It's as important as adding more computing resources. So to put it in perspective, for instance, a 20% optimization on a 330 petaflop system is equal to 60 petaflops. That is equivalent to the 4th fastest supercomputer in the world. So we are contributing in terms of this optimization. Also in contributing, we are contributing in packaging the software that is relevant to this COVID effort on our NVIDIA GPU cloud, which is a hub for GPU accelerated software. And we also have research tools that we have hosted on NGC, the NVIDIA GPU cloud, that are publicly available and are also optimized to be used on all broad ranges of GPUs, or whether it's laptops, NVIDIA DGX systems, supercomputers.
It's great to see that level of collaboration across the country to get that computing power out to everyone. So we're running out of time, so I really want to ask one more question. It has to do with what's coming next. So if each of you would share what projects you're most excited about, whether it's a solution, a method, a technique, what you're seeing in the marketplace. I think everyone would like to know and hear from you about, what is on your mind. And if we could start with Dr. Chavez.
There's too many. I'm going to say the one that I'm very excited. I'm a big fan of the data. So basically, right now they're working hard to get the data. The NYU with the Facebook is an unusual collaboration that to get the data faster from the MRI machine, 10 times faster. And the question is if you can use the neural network to get the images and then you using another neural network to analyze those images, why do you need the middleman? You can just basically go from data directly to the solution. And that is an area that I'm interested. The one that is gonna hit the home run in a couple of years is it would be digital twin, basically to have a twin that replicates us with all the genetic information, anatomy information, and then I already have a project in a virtual clinical trial. Basically, there's a virtual phantom that is based on the different size of the body, different shape on the children and the adult. So they created virtual human, and they do analysis or clinical trial on that. Even blood flow and other one is one of the center that should have pretty soon. That it will be is a great way of doing a clinical trial. If that has been successful, we're going to advance a lot. All of this is related to the AI because it's being used to recreate the virtual phantom, virtual machine, and visual analysis. So.
I think you're going to have a fan club after this. A lot of people looking these things up. Real briefly, Dr. Flores.
I'm actually very excited about work we're doing with the NIH. We have already developed some models for COVID on CT scans. These have been published. They are used by researchers today. And we are building with our applied research team and the NCI some other models coming down the line. You will be hearing about them very soon, so stay tuned.
Great. Alistair?
I think one of the things I'm most excited about is the way that AI is being rapidly applied in COVID at the bedside. One of the groups we work with at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, they were one amongst the first to identify the blood clotting issues related to COVID using machine learning on CT images from patients they had coming in. And that drove actual change in the way that COVID patients were treated and in saving lives. And that's continuing in a whole lot of ways. And that's why we're bringing together all of not only our data, but data from other parts of NIH in an interoperable way. Somewhat serendipitously, we're sort of kind of ready to do that now. But COVID has really driven that, and the ability to apply AI across all of the data, biomedical data, plus electronic health records is huge.
That's an awesome answer, bringing together technology and research and the medical leadership. And Dr. Brennan, take us home. What are you most excited about?
The National Library of Medicine now has a repository of over 30 million articles, almost 100,000 of which could be useful in the COVID discovery. But finding those articles quickly is a challenge. Our researchers, including Xinjiang Li, has put together an AI-driven algorithm to better search the literature, to use a relevance-based ranking to bring the COVID-related literature by location, by the kind of, whether it's a therapeutic trial or a vaccine trial, and most importantly, by the most recent results. We're also bringing in preprints. So the COVID literature is now informed by very quick turnaround from the literature. So we're accelerating the access to the literature just as the computational folks are accelerating the use of it and the application of the findings.
That's fantastic. So I want to thank each of you. Amazing work that you're doing. Thank you so much for taking the time. Our next panel is led by my friend and colleague, Alex Brown. They're going to be focused on data sharing techniques, which is a great segue for our discussion. We got them teed up nicely. So thank you, everyone. And I'm passing the virtual mic over to you, Alex.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Erin. I do very much appreciate that. And I am joined today by two very esteemed panelists. One is Ms. Karen Evans. She's the Chief Information Officer with the Department of Homeland Security. And we are also joined by Dr. Rohit Chittal, Program Manager with the Defense Advanced Projects Research Agency, more affectionately known as DARPA. With that, Ms. Evans, would you give us a 30-second thumbnail on your history and your role with DHS?
Well, I've only been at DHS since June the 1st. My previous role was I was the Assistant Secretary for Energy Security, Cybersecurity and Emergency Response, fondly called CSER. And so that was a brand new office that was established by the Secretary of Energy. And prior to that, I ran a cyber talent effort called the U.S. Cyber Challenge, which was a nonprofit. And my experience, I started as a GS2 and left the government under the Bush administration in the position that is now called the federal CIO. So that's it in 30 seconds.
Perfect. Dr. Chattal?
Sure, yeah, thanks. Hi, Alex, and thanks everyone for joining today. Rohit Chatale, many people know me as Ro as a nickname. I am an infectious disease epidemiologist. I've been at DARPA for about a year now, so not that long. Have about 20 years of background in disease surveillance, outbreak response, disease detection. If you remember the show House, that's on House MD on TV, my background has been that for global populations. So looking for diseases, finding them, stopping them quickly. That's sort of a little bit of a nutshell. So happy to be here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Hey, so look, let's dive in. AI is all the rage. It has been. Data sharing has been something that's been particularly important across industry and particularly across government with the environment we find ourselves in right now. This particular technology and science represents countless opportunities to innovate in several ways. What are some of the ways that you are leveraging AI as a tool to meet the mission and objectives of your organization? Ms. Evans?
Well, in this particular role as the Chief Information Officer at DHS, I'm getting my hands around all the data and the possibilities. So as you have said, there are a lot of opportunities of how we can leverage the data in order to be able to really understand, for example, more about our workforce. I'm going to get really selfish and talk about the cybersecurity needs and the skill sets and what we have and what we don't have, and partnering with our Chief Human Capital Officer. She has a lot of data to be able to leverage that, but also then to be able to project out into the future. What are the future skill sets that we're going to be able to have and that we're going to need in order to manage the art of the possible? Because technology is so ingrained in everything that we're doing, we're going to have to be able to have the right skill sets to manage the art of the possible.
Thank you. Dr. Chatale? I think you're on mute.
Thank you. Take myself. All right, better. Sorry about that. So for us, I mean, I completely agree with Karen. I can tell you a little bit about sort of, DARPA. A lot of people don't really understand DARPA, so I'll just tell you about 10, 15 seconds about what DARPA is. We're a DoD agency within the USD, or Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering. So we're sort of, in one pillar, and then another pillar is preparedness and readiness or response, which is related to the health of the force. So we're under the research and engineering parts. Most people know about the internet and GPS and hypersonics and aviation and even artificial intelligence. A lot of the wins with artificial intelligence, including the sensors in the phone, have been developed through DARPA programs. So a lot of the focus with DARPA is to really do transformational activities. So a lot of the things that CDC, NIH, USAID are funding are actually not things that we fund. We fund big sort of moonshot type technologies. So we sort of look to the top of the Empire State Building or the moon and say, how can we get there, and show where's the technology to get there. So there's a lot of focus on really thinking big and transformationally. So the reason I tell you that is, one is to let everyone know kind of what DARPA's focus is. A lot of the incremental changes and incremental research is not what DARPA's focused on. I actually inherited a program about 8 months ago called PREEMPT. PREEMPT stands for Preventing Emerging Pathogenic Threats. and it's on the website. So basically the goal of preempt is to block and prevent zoonotic disease transmission. So most people, most physicians, scientists are focused on looking at the human. How do we get a drug into a human? How do we get a prophylactic into a human? But the preempt program focuses on preventing the diseases in animals and insects. So really, really what we call DARPA hard. And so just a couple quick, I'll just mention a couple quick performers. So we have UC Davis, University of California, Davis, that is actually looking at a disease that's big in West Africa called Lassa fever virus. And so trying to prevent the spillover of Lassa fever virus from rodents into humans. So that's, they do that using some really neat AI, some machine learning, boosted regression trees, for example, to understand what's the sort of remote precipitation data, what's going on in the climate in the area, what are the species of vectors in that area, what's the burden of illness or infectious disease in those rodents, and what are factors that might be involved with spillover to humans. So UC Davis is working on a scalable countermeasure that basically would be a vaccine that you'd put into the rodents that would then propagate through several generations, and that would then stop Lassa fever virus within the rodents. I'll mention one more group right now for this question is Montana State University and their sub-performers, Rocky Mountain Laboratory, UCLA, and many groups around the world, focusing on risk factors involved in the spillover from bats to intermediate reservoirs and to humans, right? So we all know that SARS coronaviruses have come from bats. That's generally accepted. But how do they go from bats directly to humans? Usually they go through some intermediate reservoir. So understanding the pathways from bats to humans and then within a human, what's going on. There's a lot of really interesting, boosted regression trees, supervised and unsupervised learning models that are used to figure out those pathways to spillover. So those are just a couple quick examples of how we're using AI.
Gotcha. Hey, well, let me ask you this question. And you may have touched on it in the previous response, but I mean, to your point, you have H1N1, SARS, and now COVID-19 is, pandemics that seem to come out of to some extent or another, and not to forget about Ebola. Is the preempt program leveraging AI? And if it's not leveraging AI, what are some of the programs that you're leveraging AI to help with some of the surveillance systems and to kind of get out ahead of those?
Yeah, right. So I would say that, we have 6 performers within the preempt program. I mentioned too, UC Davis and Montana State is the prime performer. We call them performers. Some agencies call them partners. And then we have 4 others. I might mention them throughout the session. But every one of them is using some basic machine learning, whether it's the first wave, usually it's the second wave sort of machine learning techniques. I would say most performers are using ensemble models, mainly because of the explainability of those models. We kind of stay a little bit away from some of the deep learning neural networks simply because we're trying to understand, my performers in my program are trying to understand the explainability piece of that, right? So there's explainability versus performance, and the more explainable it is, usually the performance goes down. So, this sort of pushes us more towards ensemble models and things like boosted regression trees or Bayesian networks or different, CART models, for example. But, getting sort of back to your question, disease surveillance is something I've spent a lot of time doing, whether it's syndromic surveillance or case-based surveillance or event-based surveillance. I worked on event-based surveillance at the CDC about 15 years ago. And so I think, we are using AI increasingly, a lot of natural language processing, language translation algorithms, for example, being used both, on the unclassified side and classified. Most of this, though, these days is open source information. So, everybody has access to it. But the idea really, I think, here is that for disease surveillance systems and disease control systems, there's a lot of focus on, we have these multimodal or sort of individual data streams, which are really great case-based surveillance, for example. So surveillance system for polio. But what about the fusion of data, right? So the fusion a few years ago was kind of a dirty word, but really the idea is, can we fuse it intelligently to get at indications and warnings of early data or early events? Ebola case, a human case in the middle of Congo. We can actually pick up those cases. We can pick up a dead cow in the middle of Saudi Arabia with these systems. So there's a lot of focus on that. I think it's important just to say, and I can talk more, but that biology is really a different animal than sort of abiotic systems, right? So you look at the phone and you go, okay, this can recognize your face based on a lot of the features and using a neural network. It's a lot harder in biology to make sense of a genome because of complicated sort of what genes mean, all the way to sort of the omics techniques to what actually is produced as a protein. So anyways, I just want to say a little bit about really talking about that. Again, we're doing a lot of work in lots of different areas there. So yeah.
Gotcha. Well, great. Hey, look, thanks so much. I think there's frequently the opportunity for the government and the private sector to work together. And I think even within the government sector, there's the opportunity to share a great deal of data. Ms. Evans, I had spoken earlier about some of the things that DHS is doing, how that information, working with organizations like DARPA, might be leveraged using AI to actually advance being ready for some of these threats.
Well, in listening to Ro talk, which is very exciting, gets me very excited when I talk to folks who work at DARPA, you're really looking at, from a CIO's perspective, the practical applications of the inventions, and they think of like, what if? And then what the government, in partnership with industry, the way that you're bringing it up, what we have the opportunity to do with our data sets is actually then take the next step and promise when they're looking at really big things. And it looks like it's promising to work through some of these things, then we get the opportunity to try to implement them within a government enterprise. And so it's taking some of the vision that DARPA has, because you can see the excitement and everything that they're talking about, and then bringing what Ro has envisioned, and then those partners, we call them partners, Ro, with the universities, but being able to say, is there a practical application now to be able to do that? And then what then becomes the challenges? And so what we were talking about earlier, and some of the things that we're doing for contact tracing in order to be able to bring our workforce back, right? But then because of the public health issue that we have, and then you're talking and looking at all the other things that Ro was talking about with CDC and how we have to report the data, there's a lot of opportunities that you can then do that analysis from that contact tracing that we're just doing with our own, that we want to be able to do with our workforce when they come back, so that we can then, as they're in their communities, ensure public health, right? There's public safety issues associated with that. That's the same thing that Ro was talking about when he's looking at DoD as a whole. And then what are those issues? How can we apply the data? How can we apply some of these really long range types of things that would affect our workforce? And his efforts are going to be powered by what I believe you're getting to, which is a lot of the data sets that we already have within the government.
Gotcha. Oh, okay. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if Dr. Chalet, if you had anything to add to that. If not, I think we can move right to the next one. I mean, I think
okay, yeah. I think she covered it quite well.
Okay, great. Here, another question for you. So with science and technologies that abound and they offer all of these opportunities, there's generally some challenges related to the practical application of them. And just curious to know what you can foresee in terms of some of the unexpected challenges or some of the challenges that you would see in the near future as you push forward with some of the implementation of AI technology and sciences.
Well, can I take this first before, because we'll all get excited when Ro starts talking about the things he's doing. But I do want to make a little plug here is that you actually hit on something that's important to the administration, which is the partnership, talking to industry, but then what are the challenges with the technologies and the bounding? So the administration does have an executive order out there dealing with artificial intelligence and maintaining the leadership, America's leadership with artificial intelligence. And it is led out from the Office of Science and Technology Policy. And the idea behind that is really to answer some of the questions that you're posing. Like, we can see it from our practical and my environment. But what the administration is really trying to look at is, okay, we're leading in artificial intelligence, but what could potentially be some of those challenges as we work with our industry partners, and what would be some of the unintended consequences? Like, I know what they're going to be in my environment and what I'm doing as the CIO of DHS. That's why I have a chief privacy officer and a civil liberties officer and all these other places so that we can work on those. But there's a lot of promise from this data and from this technology, and using machine learning and artificial intelligence to predict trends and those types of things. And so it really is going to be like, okay, you have this data, here's how we could use it. What are going to be the challenges of that? And so I think that kind of sets a row up to talk about a lot of other things over that's happening at DoD and in DARPA.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I mean, I certainly echo your concerns. I would just, what I would do is I would probably just talk about some of the things that I think about that my partners like to think about. I personally like the word partner better myself, but in any case, it's just a word. So, I think, one of the challenges that I think about are training data. So training data are really hard to find in this field. It's not like you can scrape the internet, and just find a whole bunch of data. Certainly you can do that, and we do that for disease surveillance, disease detection. But, if you're looking at things like viral evolution, quasi-species evolution, how do you get that data? You get that data through laboratory work or through maybe some robotics that are used in some really new technologies that we have a group of my performers that created a new technology called a viroreactor that essentially is a robotic technique to pass cell culture through many passages and be able to develop mutations. So really interesting stuff, but you got to do that work. There's a lot of field work and a lot of bench work that's needed to produce that training data. And so the other thing that's interesting is my performer, UC Davis, that's working on transmissible vaccines, or scalable countermeasures, as we like to call them, they say, look, we have all this data in animals, but we don't have enough data of what's going on in the humans because governments maybe don't want to share that data. Because if they're sharing that data, they're admitting they have an issue, right? This has come up in the current outbreak as well, and all over the world, including here at home. So I think that the concern is really, getting that data. I think that, animal countermeasures need other data sources. I mean, I think that if you think of weather forecasting, something that under Obama, I recall, there was a czar for prediction, and he had basically put out, can we create a national weather service for disease forecasting? Many of my colleagues have worked on those areas. And one of the areas, that the weather service had not looked at, 50 plus years ago was sea surface temperature, right? We all now recognize climate change and the El Nino, La Nina situation is all based on sea surface temperatures, but that covariate was not used in modeling this before for weather forecasting. So, I think that those are a lot. And another one I would just mention is privacy. Privacy concerns are increasing, right, with data, with really the lack of privacy today, with really not really good standards on how we do privacy. So I think that, understanding, for example, who's walking into my hospital, who's walking into the DARPA building or into the Pentagon or into the DHS headquarters, we would like to know, do they have COVID? So right now we use temperature, but, temperatures emitted IR is not really very good for that. And finally, I would just sort of say that one of the concerns we have, and it's outside the scope of this discussion, is certainly geopolitical concerns that probably everyone is aware of from watching the news, are issues related to sort of challenges with AI.
Hey, well, thanks very much. I'm conscious of our time. We actually have a question for the audience. I'm going to toss it out to you both. And Ms. Evans, if you wouldn't mind tackling it first, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
With the prevalence and changing pace of AI, how is IT within your organization keeping up with the fast evolution of AI?
So I appreciate the question, and I don't know that it's so much the technology that has to keep up with it when you're starting to look at it, because especially as we were talking in the pre-brief, if you have a scalable solution, so a lot of us and my predecessors here, so kudos to them, have moved forward. We have network modernization, you're in the cloud. So a lot of this gets to data management. And that's what Ro was really talking about, is like training data. And you don't necessarily want to start putting out these algorithms and using certain things with machine learning on your actual live data because of all the issues that he just brought up, dealing with privacy, dealing with those things. So I think a lot of it is having an environment within an operations like ours, and you could call it secure development operations types of things, where you can have a data set that you're saying is training data and be able to test and have the machine learning, keep learning off of it to see if it's actually going to achieve what you want it to achieve in the operational environment, whether it's new mutations in viral stuff or whether I'm trying to secure against cybersecurity attacks and things that are coming in so that my network can be self-healing. I think that piece, you don't want to test it on the full operational capabilities of what DHS has. It's being able to create the environment where you can test these algorithms and the effects of the AI going forward.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Dr. Tatali?
Yeah, I think that I really don't have much to add. I think she did a great job. The only thing that I'm thinking about would be, our IT department is probably just like any other IT department, frankly, because the reason being is, we do classified, we do unclassified work, and most are the ones, the partners are the ones that are doing it, producing a lot of data. We encourage, publications, public domain release. We encourage companies being formed. We encourage IP being created. So really, it's sort of much more on that side than I would say on the IT side. We have a great system where we're all working. A lot of us are working from home. Obviously, for classified environments, we have to go in. But I think that so the crossover, I don't see quite as important as maybe what Karen has sort of covered it nicely.
Gotcha. Okay, I have one last question for you. And I've always been fascinated by this, having worked across IT management consulting for the better part of 23 years. The talent for any new technology or science that's generally applied, whether it's across the federal government or any place else, is in high demand. And I'm curious to know how you guys are tackling the ability to keep pace with getting the right type of talent in when the private sector is, they're really looking forward to being able to attract the top talent. So maybe, Dr. Tatali, with that, maybe if you could take that on.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great question. Very, very relevant to today, to DARPA. I think when you build a good brand, you can attract people. Government salaries are not what Google pays, right? Or even the Gates Foundation, where I used to work. That being said, DARPA has a strong brand, and we have strong links everywhere in the world. It's when I was at the Gates Foundation, people would say, anybody will take the call. And I feel like that's how it is now. So I think that, but I also think that collaborations are important. So we don't, we're not a silo. We want to work across government. We have a what's called an embedded entrepreneur initiative, where we actually try to say, look, we're going to fund companies for early maybe development work. It's maybe a lot of money for a few years, but then if you don't produce, no more funding. But the most important thing is produce something and create a company out of it, create IP out of it. We have, like I mentioned, the geopolitical concerns. We have something going on the other side of the world, and we're trying to deal with that as well. So trying to keep talent here within the U.S. was very important. So I would say, we're doing the best we can. We have young faculty awards. We don't really have classic internships or the like, but I think that increasing these kinds of forums and a lot of the way that I've worked across CDC, across parts of DoD, now working, maybe meeting with Karen in the future, we can create these collaborations where we can engender folks from DHS coming over to DARPA and vice versa. So I see a lot of that, including Booz, where you were before, right? So we have people coming from private firms as well.
Gotcha. Ms. Evans?
Well, I don't know that I could have said it any better than Bro on that, and I do look forward to us collaborating more, because I love working with the DARPA folks. But what I think really for me and for the government as a whole, I agree about the salaries, But the types of programs that you get to work on here and then the funding associated with it, there is some limitation, maybe not at the Gates Foundation, but there is some limitations when you're out in private sector. I was out there for 10 years about what you can do and how you can move that forward, right? But when you're in the government, you can do the art of the possible if you make the right business case, right? So you may not necessarily get your own personal salary, but the satisfaction in how you're affecting things into the future and being able to do things and invest on behalf of the American taxpayer for things over the horizon. So I'm going to go back into looking at some of the things with DARPA, and artificial intelligence is over the horizon, just like it's new horizons here. You get to take risks here within the federal government that maybe sometimes private industry companies would be a little risk averse. And that is the right role for government to invest in those R&D efforts. We have a science and technology group here that works out directly in Silicon Valley to be able to do those types of things so that we can then integrate them into government operations. So I think you get to take, I know people don't think the government is risk takers, but you do get to take a little bit more risk, because that's really what we should be doing as a government, and in order to be able to invest in those R&D efforts into the future and then take that intellectual property out to commercialize it.
Okay, well, listen, thank you both very much. I really do appreciate your time today on this panel. And I am going to turn it over now to my friend and also colleague, Mr. Jason Windsor. He will be speaking about the Defense Health Analytics. He is the Chief Health Information Officer with GCIO. And with that, we will say goodbye, and I will be touching bases with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, Alex. Welcome to the next panel, where we're going to be discussing Defense Health Analytics. I am Jason Windsor, Alex's partner and colleague, as he mentioned, and the Chief Health Information Officer at Government CIO. And I am joined today with three of my colleagues that I've known for quite a while. We are not going to be talking about our beard care. We are going to be talking about Defense Health Analytics. So I'd like to introduce Ben Cushing. Ben Cushing is the Field Chief Technical Officer over Federal Health at Red Hat. I'd like to introduce Dr. Jesus Caban, who is the Chief of Research Informatics at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence at the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. And I'd like to introduce Chris Nichols, who is the Program Manager of the Enterprise Intelligence and Data Solutions Program Office in the Defense Health Management Systems Program Executive Office. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for joining me today. We've known each other for quite some time. A couple of us have worked with each other for quite some time. And I'd like to thank you for joining us to discuss some of the issues. I'd like to open it up with a question for all of you that kind of starts to set the stage of what we'll be discussing. And the question is, what are the biggest challenges for you and your team that you're facing with storing or analyzing health IT data? And of course, when we say health IT data, we're talking everything from EHRs, devices, registries. So I'd like to see what some of the biggest challenges you guys are facing with that. Chris, let's open it up with you.
So I think you're spot on with what you just stated, and I want to go back to that real quick. Is health IT data is not just health data, right? It's not just EHR data. It's all the subsequent data that surrounds that. I look at EHR data honestly as one source, one data source, myriad in our current environment. But when we talk about health data, we need to be focused on social determinant data, biomedical device data, over time, genomic, proteomic data, imaging data, et cetera, because that's where you're going to really get the source and capability to really drive the insights with things like AI and machine learning, et cetera. We just went on a big path over the last 6 months to move everything. I own all secondary source data for EHR data as well as other data within the DoD health space. And we moved all of that over the last 4.5 months and went live in June in AWS. So our big focus right now is smoothing everything out and then starting to integrate and how we will leverage it and putting all the right processes in place so we know where the data is. And so then we're also onboarding all of the historical data into the MIP. So then we have one space that we're tying in the future state data with all the longitudinal historical data.
Great. Thank you very much. Ben, can you add to that any piece? I know you work on some of the aspects, Chris, but then also in your own shop, the challenges with health IT data analytics. Ben, you're on mute.
I'd say across the healthcare industry at large, and especially in federal healthcare, interoperability is still one of the largest challenges. Disparate data sets are a major hurdle to pre and post processing. And it's just very difficult to produce insights from data that has not been cleansed and normalized for standardized semantics. And second, interoperability, I'd say the distribution of data across siloed infrastructure. So, a lack of centralized availability and just the sheer gravity that those large data sets represents just greatly hinders insights. So, overcoming those kinds of challenges is really where Red Hat's putting their investments, and again across the larger healthcare market.
Great. Thank you very much for that. And of course, Jesus, with your experience in research and informatics, working with both Ben and Chris as well, what's your take on the challenges that you see facing analyzing health IT data?
Yes, thank you. So from my point of view, we have been for 9 years, my group has been analyzing DoD-wide data, creating a lot of the machine learning models for about 9 years now. The biggest challenge, it is the validation of the data that we're using. Why? Because healthcare data is not clean, right? It has a lot of bias in the data as well. It's also replicated across different systems, right? There is a lot of ancillary applications, there's a lot of different databases, different EHR, and so on. So when that data is combined, validating that all the data is combined or joined correctly, making sure that the data that you feed the models, the predictive models and the machine learning models, it is it is correct, it is valid, and so on. That has been the biggest challenge. That has been the biggest factor that delays the development and deployment of these machine learning models.
Mm-hmm. Great, and thank you very much for that. So, gentlemen, with what you just discussed and taking all that into consideration, what processing must be in place or be completed in order to prepare data? So if it's health IT data that we're talking about and analyzing, what are some of the processes that we need to have in place? Ben, do you have a thought on that to start off with?
Yeah, I mean, assuming the data is accessible across boundaries and consolidated either physically or through virtualization, I would say transformational services are really essential to success for both data in motion or data at rest. It just depends on when you actually want to do the processing. I would say the adoption and enforcement of FHIR and other standards are really game-changing, but we still have to apply those standards, right? And that's going to be a slow process across the industry. And it's largely going to be done through transformational type services that a number of vendors, including Red Hat, really has buckled down and done the hard work to put forward.
Great. Jesus, Ben just mentioned FHIR and some of the other processes. Are you seeing the use of those technologies or any other back-end processes in your shop?
Unfortunately not, right? The adoption, and I'm speaking of myself, right? So, but the adoption of data APIs across the military health system, we are behind, right? But that's why we do have leaders like Chris Nichol, knowing that there is a need, and we need to put the infrastructure in place, the policies and the governance in place to be able to enable that. Because right now you're asking about, some of those, what needs to be done, right? We're still at the level of, across the MHS, we just need a data catalog because we still don't know all the data that is being collected. right? So starting with the baseline, say, tell me what every system in the hospital across the MHS, what data elements they're collecting, or if they're pulling the data from someone else and then giving me the data, tell me the data lineage, where that data element came from. We're still at that point. That is an important part to be able to then later enable those APIs that can provide data as a service.
Excellent points, excellent points. So Chris, on that note, and it was a great transition from Jesus, and for those of us that have worked in government or for government, we understand that there's restrictions, we understand that things can't move as fast. So what do you see as some of the challenges facing defense health in order to capitalize on the new data analytics opportunities that are out there?
So I think first off, I'll be the first to say, right, I abhor technology. I'm an informaticist, right? I'm a clinician by background, and I got into this industry and out of the clinical side, not to drive technology, but to put the right technological components in place to drive better health outcomes. And I say that because everything that Jesus was talking about, the data provenance, the cleanliness of the data, it starts more from a human factor piece, and that's where we got to work backwards to get to those things, right? And so we're really driving a lot of things around really the 8 tenets around enterprise data management in order to really focus on how do we drive better governance? How do we help drive this organization to understand that we need a CDO to be put in place, not for me to be the CDO, but to then drive that functional aspect of things from a requirements and partnership perspective, right? And then data quality management, master data management, I mean, MDM, as well as metadata management, all of those things tie in together. And I think those are, because what we really want to do, the clinicians, because you've got really multiple communities here, right? You have the clinical side and you have the research side and many other variant sides, right? But the clinicians, they don't need to know where the information is coming from. They need to be able to trust it. And so part of that is us getting to the point that we present them the information in a useful manner, and we manage the back end capabilities the right way to drive those things to reality. I think that's the focus piece. And then us, like I said, moving to AWS and starting to aggregate all of that. Jesus talked about a second ago about more of automating a data dictionary, and that's where we're in the process as well. We were doing that in parallel with our AWS move. And now we're up and running on that work effort and actually just executed that vehicle. Because the intention there is so we know where the data is, and not just the data within the MIP, the MHS information platform, but all of those other varying sources. So we know where to go get it, right? And that will help drive us towards really being a federal health data hub.
And I think you made a great point in differentiating between data analytics opportunities and just new technologies.
Right.
So I appreciate that, because that is something that we've always had to be good stewards of taxpayer dollars, and now as a sole taxpayer, I do still appreciate that. Yeah. Do you have any other aspects of that and challenges you see in capitalizing on new data analytics opportunities?
I think it's the partnerships that we define, and I think we need to work towards. When you say new technologies, it's really what are we trying to get to, right? I mean, when you start talking supervised, unsupervised learning, and you start talking in the machine learning and AI, and I really call AI, I don't really call it artificial intelligence, I call it augmented intelligence. And I do that because for the functional, it should be augmenting the clinician, it should be augmenting the work that they're doing. It's not replacing them, right? There's a company out of Seattle that is using text-based messaging to do a lot of work in this space in healthcare to replace an on-site visit, even a telemedicine visit. And they're using a lot of AI algorithms, but then they're also utilizing and basing that upon clinicians managing each of those interactions with the patients, right? And so it's that merging of that in that clinical visit that is making that organization successful right now. And I think that's one of many that we're seeing, and it's us organization tying it to the strategy so we can then drive this the right direction, because that's where we're going to find the funding and the real strategic intent and implementation capabilities of these types of efforts.
Can I just add on top of that a little bit, Jason? Like I think what Chris is describing is applied AI, right? Like actually using the AI to augment clinical care at the point of care is really where I think we're going to see the biggest impact in the healthcare industry at large. And there's just a lot of steps to get there. So these kind of like early pilot projects and activities are really paving the way towards a future with just better quality and duration of our collective lives.
Agreed. So if we transition to talk about AI just a little bit, Jesus, how is Defense Health uniquely positioned to take advantage of AI technologies?
Excellent question, because the main reason why I came to the DoD, I used to be, the first panel you guys saw, Dr. Brennan, talking, one of the panelists. I used to be at the National Library of Medicine 9 years ago. I used to be a staff there doing research, different director at that point. Well, we were missing, my focus is healthcare, right? And analysis and informatics in healthcare. We were missing the longitudinal aspect, because I could go to building 10 at NIH, get a nice data set collected for patients. But in the DoD, I can go and say the last 5 years, the last 10 years, the last 20 years of this service member, since an injury happened, what has happened to this service member over time? Or when they were healthy, I have data all the way to when they got sick and after that. So the biggest value of the MHS data, it is a longitudinal aspect that you will not find in any of the big hospital network, right? Because you go to a hospital if you're sick, but in the DoD, people have to go to the hospital even if they're healthy. So the longitudinal component of the data, it is amazing, but we have to be very, very careful when we go and try to convince or sell things about machine learning or AI and so on. Why? First one, it is we need to keep what is the clinical relevance of what we are doing, right? Because it is something that we are trying to doesn't maintain the clinical perspective, then it will not be adopted. It can be the best thing out there, but it will not be adopted. Then the second one, being able to explain the output. And this one, actually, even I struggle sometimes, because some of the tools that we develop and so on, they use neural networks and deep learning and BERT models for the natural language processing and so on. We put it out there, providers come back to us and say, can you explain to me how it reached this conclusion? So being able to explain the output, it is critical. Otherwise, it will never be adopted. And then the last one, I would say it is more the data bias that we have. For example, in the DoD, active duty, 80% plus, 85 maybe, are male service members, right? So that just adds bias to the data. Therefore, we always need to make sure that our models, when we build AI models, they don't drift over time, meaning they start performing at 80% accuracy, predicting that somebody will develop PTSD or predicting that this person will recover from cancer, and then suddenly start drifting without us noticing. So this is very important that anything that we do, we kind of monitor how it's performing over time.
Yeah.
Next question is kind of for the three of you again, because I'd like to see the individual discussions. Where do you see the most potential for AI technologies within Defense Health? Ben, I'm going to start with you as a Red Hat side.
I would say, I think the more obvious one and the one that's actually being done a lot right now is population health, right? Like, so analyzing large data sets, looking for insight for, various different cohorts and how you might, apply your energies to solving those problems for that cohort. The real-time predictive analysis that Dr. Caban just talked about is really, I would say, the next step of that, right? Like being able to, understand that a patient is about to have an adverse condition and actually get ahead of that and do it without, worrying about drift and the bias that the data set may have. I think that's an area we're going to start to really see improvement in healthcare. And then lastly, the thing that gets me really excited is the potential for process automation and AI to really come together. And that's back to what Chris was talking about with the applied AI side of things, right? Where if you can actually model like a chronic kidney disease or any sort of care plan, right? And then have decision nodes within that care plan be influenced by an AI that is running off of large data sets. I think that's the space where we're going to start to see the most potential and ultimately better measured outcomes. I mean, just to Dr. Caban's point about measuring those outcomes and making sense of them, with an automated care plan, you actually have set goals, right? So you can actually measure the outcomes against those goals, and that's a data point that's really necessary to evaluate whether you're being successful or not. Anyways, those are the three that I think are really out there and potent.
Perfect. Thanks, Ben. So, Chris, any additional things or comments on what Ben just mentioned about technology capabilities or potential within Defense Health?
I think there are a lot of potentials, right? And I think we in the DoD are in a very good position in this space, not only from the direct care side, but also the management of the business and the way we manage the business and the way that we send a large portion of our population out to the purchase care arena, right? And so I think when you meld those things together and then you remember what our real mission is, and it is a ready medical force, but a medically ready force, right? And that's important to really think about. So because then we step into more of the larger scale readiness aspect of things, and tying in with our partners in that side of the house, not just within healthcare, but together. And so part of that is going back to identifying the best use cases that we can drive this around, identifying where the data sits, and then working to bring that data into the right platforms to do this work. Right now, I'm in discussions around work in digital pathology, in proteomics, genomics, medical data, obviously medical data, but medical device data and many other things. And so it's really looking at that spectrum and then how you're tying all those disparate sources together and then working the policy and process issues. Right now, we talked about it takes over 200 days for me to onboard a new data source. And it has nothing to do with the data. It's everything to do with processes and DUAs and DSAs from a sharing and usage perspective, and us knocking down those types of boundaries and then working with the right communities to identify the priority tasks and not just in the direct clinical, but really that research realm as well, because that's where we're going to find our true insights that will then drive into the healthcare arena directly. And I think that's the big thing that's happened over the last 20 years is really the technology, but then also the exponential growth of data and tying all those things together.
Agreed. And I love the points that you made. So Jesus, with this same question, but I'm going to give a little bit different twist for you because you mentioned some of the things that I call syndromic surveillance, some of the things that used to be clinical decision support in the past. Has AI taken that to a new level with treating our patients in the facilities from an informatics and research standpoint?
Yes and no. I'll explain. Why? Because unfortunately, this concept of machine learning, artificial intelligence, AI, and so on, whatever you want to call it, it's a buzzword, right? Mm-hmm. What had happened is it had enabled some tools from the 1980s to go and say, hey, I'm using AI, I'm using machine learning and so on, and all they're doing is just a simple linear regression. So the correct answer is yes. Now with all these models, like in the deep learning arena and so on, that are, they scale, they look a lot of the hidden variables. Yes, now we have better algorithms, better technology to get there and being able to satisfy those needs. However, we have to be very clear, very specific about not overselling something, because once we go start promising something that doesn't work, it will never be adopted.
Got it. Earlier on, we talked about some of the processes that need to be in place to prepare and manage data. What about infrastructure systems? Are there any that are required to take advantage of new AI technologies? Chris, are you seeing any of that in EIDS?
I'm seeing, I wouldn't say too much of it. It's the ongoing issue of what are those right things? And I think that's what we're, as we move into a real compute and store capability with our new, GovCloud environment, I'm thinking more, I'm looking down the line 2-3 years, and Ben brought up, RPA and, robotic processes, those types of things. I'm looking at how do we start to plan this the right way so we can then resource this the right way, because I have people knocking at our door every day, but I need to think about it more from a holistic perspective and how I tie all these things together to serve like folks like Dr. Caban is one of my customers, right? And then how do we do this? And so I really see that kind of going back to all I was talking about, this different disparate data sources. I really see this in a hub and spoke model. And that's kind of how we're developing and building out the MHS information platform, is really the hub that all of these data sources are tied to, and the work is being done for DoD healthcare purposes within that MIP enclave. Over. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Ben, from your aspect, do you have a different viewpoint on infrastructure systems that may need to be in place to take advantage of AI technologies?
Yeah, I'd say that, there's a lot of technologies that are being embraced today that are enablers for AI. And I'd say the advent of technologies such as containerization have really led to significantly smaller infrastructure footprints. And those smaller footprints are leading to distributed systems, which will directly, impact and assist for compute, storage, and data in motion. So, and those systems are essential to producing AI at scale, and also producing reproducibility, which is a big part of success inside of AI, inside of data science. I'd say that the IT industry has embraced the concept of microservices as well for simple data processing and functions and discrete logic. That same concept is now being applied to machine learning. So like researchers across NIH, HHS, DHA, and across the commercial market have been publishing algorithms as microservices and orchestrating the data flow between those services to produce predictive outcomes for some of our most pressing public health challenges, such as COVID-19, depression, diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. So there's a lot of activity for AI, but the fundamental infrastructure technologies have been embraced and are continually being embraced because they are the table stakes for getting to this sort of AI ML space that we all want to be playing in.
Great. So I got one last question to kind of wrap things up for each of you to answer. As DoD and the VA move towards an increasingly common electronic health record, it will obviously make VA data more available for defense health and vice versa. How do you think that a common EHR will help enhance your ability to conduct more advanced data analytics? Chris, I'm going to start with you.
So I would say that's one of the reasons why on the DoD side, my whole program office was moved out from under the J6 and over to DIMS for that whole purpose, to focus on that future state around data. Data is a horizontal And that's kind of why I'm saying, we're looking at this more from a federal data hub perspective and in partnership with VA and other federal entities. And it's about really putting the right information, not data, the right information in the right hands at the right time to make it actionable for folks, right? And I think we have multiple different projects with the VA already, and that's only going to expand. And that's all as we integrate more and more over time.
Yeah, well, that kind of goes back to what you and I used to hear: data, information, knowledge, wisdom to outcomes, right? So, absolutely. Ben, any thoughts on that and your ability to conduct more advanced data analytics with a common EHR?
I would say the faster we can get to a true longitudinal patient record, the better, right? Like just having that patient record be truly reflective of the patient's care over their lifetime is something that's going to be a big game changer, because there's just a lot more rich content there to draw insights from.
Great. Jesus, wrap it up. Thoughts?
Absolutely. So interesting enough, from the research point of view, we are not waiting for the EHR to come. We know that that's happening. So today, actually, for the last year, I have been having weekly meetings with 3 groups in the VA. We're developing already combined joint machine learning models. The thing is the definition, right? For example, for the TBI mental health, we're doing that is to say, what is the long-term effects of having a concussion? What is the long-term effect in the VA side? It took us about 8 months to come up with the cohort. Why? Because the definition for TBI and mental health that VA uses is not the same one that the DoD uses. So it took us weekly meetings for 8 months to determine and say, concur, right? So absolutely, there is a great opportunity to continue to work with the VA, and things are changing. 7 years ago, 5 years ago was not the same. Today, it is a great partnership with the VA that will continue to enhance.
Great. Gentlemen, I can't thank you enough. Ben, it was great to get to know you much better over the preparations of this. And Chris and Jesus, it's definitely been an honor working with you in the past and continuing to work with you as we move towards providing the best services and longitudinal health record as possible for our service members, family members, beneficiaries, retirees. So I want to thank you very much for all you do every day within Defense Health, with what you do every day, because it transitions to our industry and commercial health. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to now turn it over to our last panel on the agenda today. It's the Chief Data Officer Spotlight. It's going to be moderated by my colleague, John Romps, as the Technical Director at Government CIO. John, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So as Jason said, my name is John Romps. I'm a Technical Director in our Defense Health account at Government CIO, and I'm joined here today by Carol Brismakowicz, the Chief Data Officer of the Office of the Inspector General at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and also joined by Ray Diot, Chief Data Officer, Global Healthcare and Life Sciences with NetApp. And as Jason said, this is the CDO Spotlight panel, and just a short word of introduction, like artificial intelligence isn't achievable without quality data behind it. And one of the things we're going to be getting into is one of those topics there. And as agencies move forward using data as a strategic asset and form a new Federal Chief Data Officer Council, we're going to sit down with these 2 panelists here to talk about best practices and some of the interesting achievements they've managed to come up with and accomplish working with their teams over time. So first, I'd like to jump in with Carol. This question is targeted for you, and then Ray, obviously, if you want to join in and comment. So we'd like to cover some of the ways that different parts of the government are leveraging the capabilities unique to AI and machine learning. So could you discuss one of the recent cases in which your office is using data proactively to fight fraud, waste, and abuse?
Thanks very much, John. So I appreciate this question too, because a lot of folks, I'll always ask, how many of you are happy to see your OIG show up on your door if you're in the federal government, right? And who raises their hands? Like nobody ever in the history of ever. But one of the things that we've been really working on, I've been in this role for about 5 years, is truly empowering our OIG staff to use data proactively to help fight fraud, waste, and abuse. So the way I like to think about it is, for the Department of Health and Human Services, there are a lot of providers doing exactly the right thing, but there are some that are not. And so how do we leverage AI and predictive analytics to rapidly identify potentially those bad actors? So we're staying focused even in this crazy time. I wanted to share with you an example of how we partnered successfully with our law enforcement agents to use predictive analytics to support their fraud detection efforts, and then it ultimately led to a case and a conviction. So I'm going to tell you, right, sometimes these cases take a while to actually prosecute and come to conviction. So I'm going to tell you some details. It was in a press release from October of this past year, so it's pretty current. Of course, this is always a journey, but we found an opioid prescriber that had a high risk score in our predictive analytics, and he had some concerning statistics as compared to their peers. So, right, the volumes of data we're looking at with some of the Medicare claims data, it's a lot for a single person to look at. So we're trying to leverage AI and ML techniques to help us rapidly build these models and help us pinpoint where we need to focus on investigative effort. So in talking with our agents and showing them these high risk models and the results, it actually led to opening a case. So ultimately, the pill mill doctor was convicted on 16 counts of healthcare fraud and illegally dispensing drugs. So part of this journey, right, we have to convey information to our partners, our agents, right, within our Office of Investigations, who also have to work with the Department of Justice to prosecute these cases, and ultimately that have to go in front of a judge and jury to explain what they're seeing in the data and everything else that they're finding in the case. So in this particular case too, we actually had one of my staff was an expert witness at trial, a subject matter expert, to talk about what we found on the data and how it came to be and how it, in some of the statistics, it looked like an outlier. But it's really a powerful way of rapidly going through the data to sift through that data, specifically target potentially high-risk providers to focus our program integrity efforts.
No, that's very interesting. But one follow-up, I guess, you mentioned that one of your staff was an expert witness. Was there anything special your team needed to do to prepare to, I'm assuming like kind of like in the old days back when DNA was a relatively new way of introducing evidence, that the new use of data and analytics might be a challenge for some juries or whatever, or judges to analyze. Was there any particular challenges your team tried to anticipate and possibly address in that regard?
I give my credit lots of credit because they focus very much on how do I prepare to be able to address any questions that might come up. And I think part of the preparation is also, like you said, how do you prepare for a jury that may or may not understand data analytics, may or may not understand if you say outlier exactly what that means, right? How is that relevant, right? The term statistically significant matters to a subset of the population, but my mother would not necessarily understand that. So the way we try to frame it, right, is like if I were talking to my mother, how would you explain kind of the math, the approach that got you to there, and how do you just serve as that expert witness, right? But the team's credentials are there, so it's just a matter of conveying that. So part of this is also about just the data storytelling and finding the right competency in your team and helping them be prepared to be able to tell that story about what they're seeing in the data. And of course, working very closely with the prosecuting attorney to make sure that we were part of the narrative and helping support the case.
Oh, it's a really good point. Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. It's fascinating. Ray, any thoughts or follow-ups you wanted to toss there before I get you with your question?
Yeah, no, I love the comment about data storytelling, right? There's always a facet of how do you articulate what you want to get across to the recipient or the consumer of the data. And that truly is an art, right? There's not a whole lot of science to it. It's very much artful. And it goes all the way back to a lot of the other comments that have been made across some of the other panelists today about believability of the data, right? And the pedigree of the information. So I'm sure that, Carol in her role has a tremendous amount of stock put into that believability, that faith, the trust, the integrity of information. And I think as a CDO, that's one of our critical roles that we have to fill in and that we have to provide to the rest of our organizations that we support.
No, really good point. And actually, I think we'll circle back on that with the integrity of the data idea. That's something we want to pursue a little more. But before, I'd like to give you a chance to talk about one of your recent successes. So I think we're all aware that data analysis and data science can be applied to many different topics. So for example, if you wanted to look at both healthcare and supply chain, we could discuss the distribution of personal protective equipment, like recently in the whole COVID thing, so otherwise known as PPE. I think you have some knowledge of some recent projects related to tracking PPE that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, we actually, I'm in Colorado, so we have had a little different curve than most have when it comes to COVID. But one of the things that we saw come up was the need for understanding what our COVID consumption was going to look like. and not just understand what it was going to look like, but how to plan around that. So we had to take a look at not only our healthcare data to understand what was going on at the hospitals in the community, but also what the community and national models look like, build models around that we could predict off of and forecast off of, understand then blending together our PPE data and our inventory data into a forecasting model for it. But what we came to boil down was we pulled all of that information together, both in the modeling sense and in the data sense, in order to build a what if tool so that we could provide planning and insights to our operators at the facilities and at the IDNs in the region so that they could better understand what happened if they did this. If they provided 10 million more N95 masks, a week ahead of time or a week behind time, how much of a hole was that going to put us into, or how far ahead of it the curve did it get us? So we actually took data, aggregation and data fusion beyond just getting to the forecasting piece of AI and the predictive piece of AI, but then built it into more of a reasoning system that allowed the augmentation of our operators to better plan and better understand the boundaries within which they can make decisions. And that's where we start drawing on the power of data, is when we can start making really good decisions and understanding the risk around those decisions that we're making, as opposed to here's one number and one prediction that we're looking at. It gives us an envelope to play within and to better understand how to move forward as an organization when times are tight and there's a ton of uncertainty in the air.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. There are a number of things there we could touch upon, but one thing I wanted to ask about was, so you talked about providing insight to the operators, I guess, at the local level. And so your team had to build, I guess, probably some kind of user interface to help them. Were they the ones at the user level, like actually going in and doing the what if analysis, putting in their own guesses to see what would happen and what the impact would be? And would that actually show impact beyond just their one location?
It would. So what we provided was, we provided both a system view and a facility level view that you could adjust a slider. So we gave them a bunch of knobs and sliders to play with so that it was simple, right? And they could say, oh, what happens if I do this? And our infection rate goes from 5% to 15%. Or what happens if our shipment is delayed, 1 day to 12 days? They had the ability to play with all of those and to understand what that envelope of outcomes could look like.
Wow. So this kind of goes a little bit towards, I guess, one of the earlier panels, they were talking about the democratization of data science or of data analytics. And I know there are tools out there like I wrote eRobot,
the Data Robot.
Data Robot. Thank you very much. Blanked out for a second there. I could picture the logo, but not the company name. But this sounds like your company took like you all took it a little step further with the knobs and sliders concept, and that really democratized it and gave them, I guess, removed some of the intimidation factor. And
and I think when we talk about AI and data science and in decision making, it's not just about having one tool in your toolbox. If I'm going to build a house, I don't just take a hammer, right? I'm going to take all the tools. So and I'm sure that Carol's got the same perspective in OIG that. You're going to walk in and I want all of the predictive models, no matter how simple or complex they are. I want all of the forecasting models. I want all of the ability to play with data and visualize data. That way I can tell the story effectively and understand exactly.
Oh, great. Carol, any thoughts on any of the topic, anything we just touched upon there before I kind of take us in a slightly different direction?
I absolutely agree with Ray. Part of what this empowerment, the way we visualized it, is how do we make it easy for our auditors, our evaluators, and our investigators to interact with data? So we've kind of branded it, right? We talk about it as data at your fingertips, but I'm a believer in raise all boats. So there's a lot of folks in our organization that don't know how to program in certain languages, and that's okay. I wouldn't want them to, but figuring out that interface where they can still interact and explore the data and get insights from it are incredibly important. So we've been on a journey as well to create an analytics hub that pulls together a lot of different tools that we have, just to make it super easy for our agents to find what they need pretty quickly And we worked with them, put them in the driver's seat as kind of the product owner to help us design some of that. So we baked in that customer feedback right away. We tend not to use the word customer. We very much talk about partner, right? How do we make sure, because they're going to be at the front lines using this data to drive insight and do something with it. So we wanted to make sure, how do we create an interface and an environment for them to get that data, to understand it, to interact with it, maybe where they don't have to have the data scientists with them, but then they can use it and do something with it. And with that, we also designed just kind of, I call it the phone a friend team, right? Like my team is still on standby, that if they ultimately have questions, they can still come back and ask, but we're trying to push out as much of that capability and tool set as we can, because now then you have more eyes looking at the data, which is also very powerful.
One thing you mentioned there was use the term product owner. I know enough about Agile to be dangerous. Is that an indication that your team might be using some Agile or DevOps concepts for managing your models at all?
Absolutely. So we embraced, so my partner, CIO and I, a couple years ago, actually 4 years ago now, totally embraced Agile as an approach for our teams, and not just thinking about it from an IT perspective, but how do we just embrace that as a methodology and a framework? So we use that also within my team. We did a consolidation last year of analytic functions into my team, and it was very much a core principle of how do we leverage Agile as an approach? How do we get our partners engaged with us as product owners to give us feedback? How do we think about things? How do we organize by sprints? How do we do retros? How do we figure out the backlog? The whole thing, we jumped in feet first into the deep end and just figured out how to make that work as we're developing all the things that we have kind of in our backlog, right? We have a queue of great ideas, and we wanted to use Agile as the management approach to do that. So it's been really exciting for us. I know in the beginning, it was also the big change management journey of thinking differently about how to do that and how to train our teams into Agile and how to make sure we're all using the same terms the same way. But it's been incredibly powerful, I think, for our team at least.
Yeah, and I can imagine, Ray, that with the work your team you just described, I'm assuming your team had to turn that work around very quickly with the monitoring for COVID and everything else. Were there any methodologies or approaches you all tried to apply for that?
Yeah, I think anymore working in this area, you have to subscribe to an Agile methodology. Whether it's actually managed Agile or not is kind of up to the user. But when you're trying to turn something in less than 96 hours that never existed before, it's kind of just get it done and then iterate. And with that, right, we built backlog, we formalized everything, but getting product to the floor in the time of crisis is just get it done and then fix what you did wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. Get it out there, assess it, iterate as you need to improve it. And communication, I assume is a major concern there. And speaking of so communication within your team and also without teams, based on what I've heard both of you talking about so far, it sounds like one of the things that makes everybody successful is sharing data, not just within an agency, but across agencies. So I'll start with Carol here on this one. Do you think agencies have an obligation to share data whenever they can? Like not only with the Inspector Generals in the midst of an investigation necessarily, but so along with that line though, how does your office decide whether it's safe and appropriate for your office to share data? Are there any standards or policies in place? Is it decided on a case-by-case basis? If you could elaborate, please.
So overall, my observation over the past several years, it's been exciting in the federal government because there was the Open Data Initiative. Now there is a federal data strategy. There's kind of a push about how do we better share data across the federal government and with state and local partners, right? There's kind of momentum there. There is still a balance of how do you do that appropriately with authorities for that data and make sure that it's protected data, that security is there, the privacy, especially the data we're dealing with, right? Your personal health information. I think I remember seeing a statistic a few years ago about, right, that if somebody steals a credit card, it's worth, like, I don't know, 5 cents on the market. If they steal your driver's license, it's worth maybe $1, but your personal health information record was like $20 or something, right? Like the street value of that record was just worth so much more. So we're really sensitive to ensuring the safety and protection of the information. But now granted, what we're trying to do is data mining. So you need access to more information and you're trying to integrate multiple sources because different departments and agencies have different views and can contribute to the overall picture. of what's happening potentially for a specific case. We are lucky as data stewards of a lot of this data, right? We are not necessarily creators of data as much as we are ingesting lots of sources of data. So we have things like the IG Act and the IG Empowerment Act to give us some of that authority. But there's still questions if we're trying to reach out to other agencies. How do we navigate that authority? So for me, I have great partners in our counsel's office that help us understand that, interpret that. And then, right, our Chief Information Security Officer is also one of the first people I turn to make sure we understand how are we going to safely, securely transmit any data into our system if need be. Or what I also look for is like, can I get the express lane, or can I just get access to the system that the department might have? And how do we build tools and capabilities around that, which I also see as streamlining and minimizing the burden on both sides of having to do data transfer or figure it out. Just how can we be creative about kind of a master data use agreement, set the terms and conditions up front for sharing, and then appropriately move forward with sharing of data. So that's kind of that's my view on it. Ray?
Thank you. Yeah, right.
Yeah, so I'm definitely a firm believer in privacy and security being first and foremost as we're putting together data strategy. Now, personally, my belief system is bifurcated because I believe that all data should be available for mankind to solve the hardest problems that we've got facing us today. The other half of me says, that's my data and you can't have it. So there's a tension that I think we have to deal with, both I think ethically and morally, as well as, you know, fiscally, because there's a fiscal potential, whether it's positive or negative, to having my data out in the community, right? And because I work so much with commercial and deal in life sciences and deal in healthcare, there's that potential that we have to deal with. And how can we balance, you know, exposure of enough data to solve hard problems without exposing the privacy of an individual or a group of individuals? And there's always that tension in the CDO's office between compliance and between regulatory and between security and privacy and the ability to get the job done. That is really one of the key art forms that I'm sure Carol would agree with, that we have to balance as data providers and data curators for the larger organization.
That's a really good point. And no, I for one am glad that these people are struggling with the issue rather than just taking the I'm just going to throw it all out there and let everybody play with it approach. But it is, you're right though, everyone's got their mission they have to accomplish and try to complete, and that must be a struggle. And but I'm glad we have people like you all working on these things. One question did come in from the audience. I want to make sure we get to it before we run out of time. And I think it's directed primarily at Ray, but it also could fit with some of the things Carol was talking about earlier as well. So I'll direct it Ray first, and then Carol, you can chime in and before we wrap up. So the question is this, can you talk about how you made it easy for your customers to search for and find relevant data and thus the related analytics?
That is a fantastic question, right? Master data management, metadata management, data cataloging, all of those things are absolutely necessary in the age of AI. The problem is that there's very few tools to help automate that task. So it's a very people-first process. I know at other organizations, people are starting to turn their NLP and their AI on itself to do automated data tagging and to do, you know, some of those other, you know, mechanisms to help automate and recommend solutions to data stewards and data curators. But it is absolutely a Herculean effort to do data cataloging, master data management, and metadata management, especially in the age of data lake here, data lake there, data warehouse over there, and the fight between ETL and ELT when it comes to feeding large AI models and other analytics. So what I would say in summary is simply that this. Data cataloging and data governance is absolutely mandatory for any big data project here and for going forward. Getting to the answer of doing that work is a long and arduous journey. that typically takes a lot of ownership, both in the IT shop, in the data shop, and in the business units across the organization, because it's not just prescriptive in terms of laying that information out.
Thank you. Carol, any thoughts?
I would absolutely agree with that, right? Don't underestimate the human journey on this, right? For the governance pieces, we did the same thing. And I remember some of the original reactions were, well, why do we have to catalog everything, right? And we kept talking about, well, we need to help OIG know what OIG knows, right? So we kind of embraced that adaptive governance model about there are going to be things that are truly our high value data assets. How do we get that kind of in a streamlined way? We don't necessarily have to know everything. You can imagine in our organization, if we have an audit of a particular hospital, for example, not everybody would need to have that specific data set.
Right.
But some of the other things related to like the Medicare claims, kind of higher level data sets, that's the stuff that we wanted to make sure we were encouraging through the data governance process, that we were talking about it. And then we did the same thing, right? How do you tag it appropriately? Mm-hmm. But even having the conversation, because the other thing for chief data officers is we're also driving a change management journey. So getting people to think differently about the data and what that means and how we need to organize it and how it does mean what Ray was talking about. It's that partnership between IT, the CDO team, but also the business side. And that everybody kind of understands the why we're doing this stuff, right? We don't create a data catalog just to create a data catalog.
That's right.
We create the data catalog to then help enable, right, just like this use case, to enable somebody to find the information they need very rapidly, which then is going to accelerate their work. But putting all that together, making sure everybody's on the same page, that's where governance comes into play. And usually if you come at people and say governance, they're going to shake their heads, roll their eyes, go the other direction. So our approach had been to snowball that, right? How do we get this focused on our particular project and then build our governance committee? And that's kind of the way we approached it too. So it's not, we do have technology, but it's not just technology, it's definitely people.
Always.
That's a great point. I'm really enjoying our conversation, and I wish we can go longer, but we're just about out of time. Ray and Carol, thank you very much for your time. Was there anything else you wanted to kind of leave us with? Any parting shots? Either you, Ray?
No, I think if I had to close with one phrase, it would simply be that it all starts with the data. And the data's got to be right, and the data's got to be consumable in order for us to drive decisions and drive advanced analytics and AI.
Thank you. And Carol, anything you want to leave us with here? Other than your team is amazing.
Thank you. I would agree with that, but I would also say, right, AI is for all of us. AI is not just something for the data scientists or something for those IT people. It's for everybody to understand. And so all the conversations that have come up throughout the entirety of today about understanding it, explainability, bias, it's not just for the data scientists to say, hey, here's my training data set. There's got to be people that can catch that comment and understand what that truly means.
Great.
So AI is truly here for all of us. But it's about, we're all doing this to help gain efficiency, to help see things that maybe we can't see as humans by ourselves, to give us better insights. And it's about that so what that we're on this journey for. So I think all of us, if you're not familiar with the lingo of AI, you have to be completely familiar with it and then figure out how to help all of your peers understand it too, because it's going to impact all of us in a very positive way, I think.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for your time. Really do appreciate it. And please offer thanks to all the great people you're working with who are doing such good work for our country and everybody else. So thank you very much. I think that about wraps up everything for the day. And so I think we can just say goodbye at this point. So thank you, Ray. Thank you, Carol.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Carol.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John. And thank you to all of our speakers this morning and afternoon. Wonderful content and topics covered here for our Artificial Intelligence New Horizons in Medicine event. We'll continue to follow this important topic throughout. Make sure you follow our coverage for updates on these conversations on our website at governmentciomedia.com. And if you missed any of today's virtual event, please check out the site. We'll have the full recorded event on the site, along with all coverage, including articles, as well as we're going to have a special podcast to go along with it as well. So please check that out. Finally, I'd like to thank again our sponsors, Axiom, NVIDIA, NetApp, Red Hat, and Data Robot for their partnership on this event. We're grateful for their continued support. So I'd also like to encourage you to sign up for our newsletter and make sure you're subscribing to our podcast series. We have a great list of speakers as well as guests joining GovCast, Cybercast, and Healthcast, as well as the Agile Advocate. So make sure you check that out on Apple iTunes or Google Play or wherever you get your podcasts. Finally, I'd like to make sure that everyone gets a chance to check out our next events. We have all of our events set up for the rest of the year on our event page on our website. But I wanted to highlight two. First off, our next one's going to be on cybersecurity. That's going to be on September 2nd. And then the event following that, we're really excited for as well. It's on September 16th, and will feature keynotes from the chairman and ranking members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. So make sure not to miss that one as well. So with that, I'm going to say thank you for joining us, and hope to see everybody soon.